You're listening to the Get Meal Prep Show, a podcast about meal planning strategies, improving your nutrition, and getting dinner on the table. I'm your host, Susan Watson, registered dietitian, lifestyle nutrition coach, meal planning expert, and founder of the online meal planning course, Get Meal Prepped. If you're tired of eating like crap and not knowing what's for dinner, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to the show. Hi everyone, my name is Susan Watson and I am the founder of A Little Nutrition. I'm a registered dietitian and the co-founder of Nutrition Academy, and I'm here with my biz bestie, Andrea Hardy.
Hey guys, I'm Andrea Hardy, registered dietitian and owner of Ignite Nutrition Inc. And like Susan had mentioned, we co-founded Nutrition Academy, where we help people improve their nutrition knowledge.
Yeah, we have a great course called getmealprepped.com. That's the website, but our course is called Get Meal Prepped, and it's all about meal planning and meal prep so that you're able to eat healthier and get dinner on the table and even lunch for that matter. So our podcast is answering all of those questions that relate to meal planning that you might be struggling with. So today we're going to be talking about freezing food. So Andrea, tell me a little bit about some of the foods that you prep up and freeze in your freezer.
For sure. So a little bit of background. I grew up with like a deep, those chest freezers. So I was used to like cooking ahead, freezing everything. It was something that I was exposed to all the time with my parents. And funny enough, of course, my wedding gift was a giant deep freeze. It's an upright one, so I love it. So I don't have to like lean in and dig things out. But I stock that thing full. So usually like quarterly, I spend like a week finishing up all the meals and then I move on to prepping some new ones. And I was just telling Susan, I freeze anything and everything. And Susan, I know you're kind of new to freezing. Is that right?
Yeah, so my story about deep freezers is that when I met my husband and moved in with him, he had one of those chest freezers, and I just had a little apartment size one because it was just me. And I gave that to my mother-in-law, and then we had this chest freezer, and he actually had stuff in there from his ex-wife. Like it was loaded to the hilt, and it was full of food that I had no idea what was in there. And I would go to Costco and I'd just put stuff in and like it was the top layer. Like I don't know the bottom.
What was at the bottom? Freezer
Yeah.
burnt everything.
Well, and the interesting thing too was that he had an in with someone that worked at Snyder's. And so he was getting, I guess, some food from Snyder's as well. And so there was lots of stuff in there that had been there for a long time. And, his thoughts were like, well, it's frozen, it's fine. And for me, I was like, oh, I don't know really where it came from either. So we had all this food. And then when we decided to sell the house and move, the deep freeze was, not something I really wanted to move. I found that it was just too big and clunky and I couldn't imagine bringing it up the stairs. So we decided to sell it with the house. And when we bought the new house, I told my husband, I was like, I don't think I want to get a deep freeze because when I was cleaning out that deep freeze, I was so revolted by how much food I had to throw out because it had got freezer burnt in it. And when I got to the bottom of it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is such a waste. And did we really need that space? We didn't because I was just putting stuff in the top
Right.
part of the freezer. So we decided not to get another freezer for the new house. However, in the garage, we put a spare fridge. So for the last 5 years, I've had the fridge that was in the kitchen and the freezer space that was there, and then the fridge in the garage where it had another small freezer section there too. I just had that for 5 years, and I really liked it. I liked the fact that I had to be really efficient with what I put in there and using it up. And when the freezer was empty, then it was time to go stock up at Costco again. There wasn't a lot of waste. There wasn't a lot of mystery food that was put in there because mystery food would be taking up space for my bag of frozen berries from Costco. So it was really good. However, my husband's gotten into hunting, and is anticipating getting some wild game. And with that, we needed to get a freezer. So we now have a stand-up upright freezer because I was still against the deep freezer of, I just think that it's hard to organize and get to the bottom of those. So we got an upright freezer, and I'm just starting. It's still a little bit bare, but I'm starting to load it up. I do want to keep some space for his wild game eventually, but yeah, I'm finding that it really does help to have some extra space because I've gotten into freezer meals that, large casserole dishes full of completely cooked meals that I can pull out and put into the oven. And I'm finding that that's a real time saver to do that in advance. But I don't have a lot of, additional stuff that I'm freezing yet, but I'm definitely going to be planning to.
For sure.
Yeah,
And
so
so, yeah, you kind of touched on all the reasons why people are so hesitant to like stock their freezer up or aren't sure where to start. So, my first tip is to make sure you label everything.
oh
If
yeah.
you don't, you end up, sometimes I get a little lazy, guys, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is for sure exactly, I can tell exactly what this is. However, once you get a couple more meals in there, you pull something out. Like I brought a container of what I thought was chili for lunch, and I pulled it out, and it was literally just like roasted tomato sauce that I made with nothing else in it. So it was like a base for tomatoes. And I was like, I can't eat this for lunch. So labeling is king. Just a masking tape, a permanent marker, everything that goes in my freezer gets a label. Sometimes it gets some additional instructions on it. So for me, my husband's not cooking savvy. So just having that, 350 degrees for 1 hour on it. Or the other day I made like a risotto base, and it was like, okay, add the rice, add the lemon and the egg, and yeah. So it's really easy to stick those things on, and then when you pull it out, you're like, okay, I know exactly what I need to do with this. So labeling super important.
So you put what it is, so lasagna, and then bake it 350 for 1 hour.
Exactly.
One of the other things that I do is I'll just quickly write, like right now we're in October, so I would do like 10/17.
Perfect.
So the month. However, like I would encourage, using a freezer inventory list. So in our course, Get Meal Prepped, we talk about the freezer inventory list and how you can specifically break down the different foods that you're putting into your freezer. So you're going to have cooked components, you're going to have things that are already cooked, ready to reheat, like say maybe a lasagna. We got 4 or 5 different things that you're putting in the freezer, different categories, and then you want to organize them on this list so that when you put it in. And when you do your meal planning, you can take a look at your list and go, oh, I've got that lasagna from October. I got to use that before I go ahead and do something else or buy something more.
Yeah, exactly.
First
That's
in, first out.
For sure. First in, first out. That's so important because you're right. You can end up with 8 different spaghetti sauces and you don't know which one you should use first. So
and labeling too is good because we did a turkey on Thanksgiving, and I put in some Ziploc bag or freezer bags the pulled meat, and then I saved the carcass for making some soups and stews using the bones. But I went in there the other day and I looked at the bags and I was like, oh, I didn't label them, and they both kind of look the same, like frozen pulled apart meat and frozen bones. And I was like, oh, I don't know what it is. So, it's better to, stock bones, like soup bones, put it on there, and then, pulled meat doesn't have to be, too much, but still label it. I know, back when I had the bigger freezer, if I didn't know what it was and it'd been too long, I'm like, oh, garbage. Yeah, then you've just kind of gone full circle from doing any sort of meal prep, and it's counterproductive.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And then you're wasting. It makes you sick to your stomach. I hate wasting food. So labeling is the first thing. Second thing is I like to so I do this when the seasons change. So I don't have a set date. Whenever I feel like the seasons are changing, I say to myself, okay, Andrea, you got to use up what's in your freezer, and then we'll move on to the next season's recipes. So I usually have like a 3 month, or yeah, 3 month rotation. Yes, that works out.
Okay.
Because I find that it can be very easy to have excuses to not finish perfectly good meals.
Yeah.
So usually there's 1 week where we kind of like, one, save a ton on groceries, and
Yeah.
two, finish off a ton of freezer meals. So basically whatever's left, you know, we might have 3 or 4 meals from the freezer that week, and that's good because they were prepared 3 months ago or less. And cleaning out the freezer to kind of make way for the new season stuff, because I don't really want to eat chili in the summer often. And so there's just certain things that I feel are very seasonal that I think having those set, okay, I'm going to finish off these freezer meals and also prep some new meals, keeps it fresh, keeps it, you know, a little bit fun.
And it's a really good feeling to see the back of your freezer.
Yes. Yes, it
you
is.
know, like it, you know, like when it comes to like, you know, cleaning your house and stockpiling things and, you know, just spring cleaning, but, you know, also having that sort of mindset when it comes to your freezer is, you know, get to the bottom of it, get to the back of it before you start loading more stuff in. And yeah, it feels really good to do that.
For sure.
So yeah.
For types of things I put in my freezer, I think we'll break it down into the things that are on the freezer inventory list, which I don't have in front of me, but one is cooked components, which you had mentioned. So I typically use like Ziploc bags for my cooked components, like my shredded chicken, my taco meat. Lots of times if I have leftover veg I know is about to turn, I'll blanch it, let it dry on paper towel, and put it into the bags ready to go so I can turn it into soups.
Can you explain quickly what blanching is?
Sure. So what I do, I find this especially when I have like parties and I get those veggie trays, I always buy way too much food. I'll literally take those veggie trays, start boiling some water on the stove, and I'll segregate each vegetable. So I'll blanch it. Blanching is usually, depending on the vegetable, about 1 to 3 minutes, just so that it becomes a more vibrant color. So what you're doing is actually degrading the enzymes in the vegetables so that they don't go mushy or brown. So you boil them for like broccoli and cauliflower about 2 to 3 minutes, for depending on how your carrots are cut, about 1 minute to 2 minutes. I'll blanch them. I'll rest them on paper towels so that they don't get freezer burnt. Let them dry off. And then I just put them flat in a Ziploc and freeze them. And then I have stuff ready to go for like cream of broccoli soup, or like a really nice, you know, pureed cauliflower. If you like to make like cauliflower crust pizza, or use it as like a side dish, can be really helpful.
So it's like you're making your own frozen vegetables, basically.
Exactly. And in that way, like honestly, yes, I love frozen vegetables. I use them all the time. But for me, with fresh, sometimes there is leftovers. Sometimes there are things that I'm not going to use in time, and it's a good way to not waste.
Yep, I love it. Okay, so you cook components.
Yeah. Is there any other cooked components? I know you're big and you freeze rice, grains.
I do a lot of the grains. Yeah, grains, the beans, lentils, and yeah, mostly. I also do pasta. So two different things. Yeah, so you can just boil up regular pasta, and at the al dente stage where it's still, you know, it's not like super mushy, you would drain it, and then you would put it into a freezer bag, squish out the air. Sometimes I use a straw, and I'm like, suck out the air and seal it. You can put it in that way. I also make homemade pasta, and I usually get together with a couple friends, and we'll get all our KitchenAid mixers together, and we'll make up a whole bunch of pasta, and then I boil that first, and then I put it, I drain it, run cold water under it, put it into the freezer Ziploc bags, and then suck the air out. And then when I'm ready to use it, you don't actually have to boil it again. And same with even just dry pasta that you cook, you don't want to put it back. You don't need to boil it again. So if you're making, say, a tomato sauce base, you can, once it's thawed, you just put the pasta right in. You don't actually cook it. So that saves a lot of time. So I like to have like a a full inventory of these different cooked components, cooked ingredients, ready to go for a meal. So that when you're doing your meal prep or doing your meal cooking, you're only cooking from scratch with one or two ingredients, not
For
your
sure.
vegetables, your grains, and your protein.
And it really makes planning easier to look at what's in your cooked components list and say,
Yeah,
okay, like why don't I use these things before I feel like I have to plan like 5, 6, 7 new meals for the week.
yeah, yeah,
So we do leftovers a lot at our house. So
yeah. Well,
or
and
repurpose leftovers anyways.
that's the thing is I've heard a lot of people say to me like, "Oh, I hate meal planning because I'll just cook one meal and eat it for 5 days." That's not meal planning. That's
No.
like,
Yeah,
right?
the
So you,
worst.
yeah, you want to no, and we don't like to even recommend doing that. Some people who really don't live by their stomach and they're okay with just eating the same thing over and over again, that's fine. And if that works for you, go for it. But a lot of people will say that that's boring and they get
Right.
tired of something and then they never want to eat it again. So repurposing leftovers, which
Right.
basically means converting it into a different meal, is the best way to go.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
So those cook components can be super helpful because you can use, maybe if you don't need all of that for one thing, I like to freeze mine in small enough so that I can like take out 2 bags rather than one if I need it. But you can
yeah,
use that item in, 2 different days, 2 different meals.
yeah.
The other big part of my freezer is ready to go family sized meals. So
Right.
for those, I tend to use those. I joked with Susan before, my reusable tinfoil containers. My mom is very frugal. I grew up in a very frugal household. So yeah, we reuse those. We're those people. So um, we'll reuse those like family sized containers. I wash them. My husband thinks I'm crazy. But you can buy them individually each time.
I reuse the ones from Costco. Like you can
Oh,
get the
nice.
kale and
They're heavy
quinoa
duty,
salad.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I find that you can use them more than the tinfoil ones that you get at the grocery store.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've done it. It's good.
And so usually I usually like to keep 2 to 3 items. Sometimes if I've done like a larger batch cook, I might have more, but I call them my like emergency meals. So, hey, I'm not going to be home. My husband does not cook unless it's barbecuing steaks. So it's easy enough for him to pull that out and stick it in the oven, and then I'm home later. We'll have meals together. Or if a friend is sick, or for example, my sister-in-law just had a baby, it's super easy to be like, oh, here's a frozen meal,
Hmm.
feeding other people. But
Hmm.
ultimately, it's super nice to have a couple of those on hand. My go-tos tend to be lasagnas, pasta bakes, enchiladas is super easy in those giant tins, which I love.
Hmm.
They tend to be more of my go-tos for those larger family-sized meals.
Hmm.
Some casseroles, like I'll make like moussaka, or that's basically like like a bean casserole.
Hmm.
It's very nice. It doesn't sound as boring as I just made it sound. Um, but those are some really good options. Sometimes I'll do things like chilies, which I tend to do more in my Tupperware rather than those tinfoil containers.
Hmm.
Um, Cooked components would fall to spaghetti sauce. But yeah, I like to keep those like one pan meals ready to go.
Yep.
Is there any
Awesome.
other that you like to do, Susan, for one
Well,
pan
I'm just
meals?
looking on my counter right behind us here. What I've done is my dietitian version of the glow bars, so like granola bars,
Yeah,
and I will cook up a bunch of those, and I'll freeze them in the tray, like just
that's a
like put them
great
right in the
idea.
freezer for meal prep for my kids. So I just find that doing those, even in the tinfoil containers, are great too, because when it comes to time, yeah, you can cut them all up and wrap them all individually, and if you have time to do that. But if you're batch cooking and you've made a big couple different batches of them, you can just freeze them in the trays and then each week pull them out.
And I love that idea because you can pick a portion that works for your family. Like you could have smaller trays where you're going to go through that in a week, or if you
Yep,
have a larger family, you can do bigger trays. So
yep,
really the nice thing is you can make it work for, okay, do I want leftovers? Do I just want enough to feed us for these 2 meals or one meal?
yep.
So it's really versatile that way.
Yeah. While we're thinking about it, I'm just thinking about what I did today. So on Saturday, I did a big batch cook of Belgian waffles
Yes.
for the kids, and the kids have been having waffles all week. But because kids can be finicky, and one minute they're all about waffles, next minute, no, I don't want that. I keep them in the freezer,
Yeah.
and I'll ask them in the morning, you guys want waffles? Today was they're good. We're on day 4, and they're still good with having them. But if you just kind of leave them in the fridge or the counter and one day they're like, no, I don't want them, then they could go to waste. So I will do batch cooking of cooked components or cooked, full meals, but the baking stuff. So muffins, waffles, pancakes, breakfast items, granola bars, and I'll have all of those in the freezer as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm a big pancake girl, and it's easy enough to take it from frozen and stick it in my toaster.
Yeah.
Peanut butter, banana, I'm set. Make a little
Yeah.
pancake sandwich, out the door.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how do you reheat your waffles?
Toaster.
Yeah. See,
Yeah.
that works perfect. You don't even need to unthaw them. You can cook them right from frozen in the toaster.
Yeah. One of the things I found today was because I guess I had I did a really big batch. I did a double batch, so I had quite a few, and I had put them into the plastic resealable bags. And this morning when I brought it out, they had kind of stuck together, and I couldn't pull them apart, so I had to let it sit and thaw for a little bit to open it up.
Sure.
What I've done in the past when I'm on my game is I take parchment paper and I will lay the parchment paper in between, and then it doesn't happen. So I'll do that with the pancakes for sure because they like to stick together. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll either make bread or something like banana bread, and if I cut it up, I'll put a little piece of parchment paper in between them as well, or I'll lay them flat and do a couple layers in the bag so that they don't stick together. And it just makes it a little bit faster to pull them out.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
My last big piece of freezer meals, and I find this works really well for people that eat out, bring them lunches to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I actually do is when I make larger batches of things, I'll freeze individual portions so that
Okay.
I usually say, like, keep a variety of 2 or 3 things in your freezer so that, let's say you don't have leftovers one day, you can pull one of those things out. So,
Emergency meal.
exactly. And they're individually portioned, so you don't have to unthaw it. It's nothing that you have to think about in the morning. I just go to my freezer, grab it out, and out the door.
Yeah.
Soups, stews, even like quesadillas, enchiladas. I do a lot of like Thai curries, stir fries, where I'll put my rice and then my meat and vegetables on top. All of those things can be frozen. I usually say, eat them within that 3-month period because they will get freezer burnt because there is more moisture in those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find they hold up super well. I'll even do like individually wrapped like burritos, that sort of stuff that it's nice and easy to grab.
Yep. It's not really a healthy thing, but it's a mom time saver thing. I have a recipe. Remember I gave you that recipe for the Martha Stewart one bowl cake recipe?
Yes.
Well, it's usually big enough to make enough for 2 cakes, depending on the size of cake you're doing. And so I'll make like a layered cake, but I'll do 2 pans of it because it makes enough. And so I'll use the 1 pan for that event, whatever kid's birthday it is, and then I actually freeze a sheet of layered cake in the freezer, and
That's
I'll wrap it
perfect.
up and I'll freeze it, and then it's somebody's birthday or somebody's coming over, and it's a quick and easy dessert idea to pull out already cooked up sheet cake, and then you can make it into whatever dessert idea that you want. So I'll actually I'm thinking what's in my freezer right now, and I have a chocolate sheet cake that we have a family member that's birthday's coming up. I'm like, oh, half of the cake is already done. I just got to figure out what I'm going to do for the filling. So thinking about just how you can save your leftovers. But I do have that on my freezer inventory list under desserts and treats or pre-cooked items so that I remember that it's there because I don't know. Is just having it there. Or you can cut it up, or even you can use that recipe that I gave you to make cupcakes too, and those freeze really well as well. If you have little kids that every once in a while I'll get an email saying, oh, it's your turn to bring cupcakes.
Yeah.
It's like, ah, it's like, oh, I got them in the freezer ready to go.
For sure. That way you're not running to Safeway and like sprinkling icing sugar on something that you didn't bake. Here you are. So
You know,
yeah, that's
I'd
great.
stay up to 10 o'clock before I would do that.
Yeah, yeah. So that is how I use my freezer.
Yep.
I like to keep it nice and organized, and I find like there is no excuses in my house to not pull something out and be able to eat in 5 minutes flat.
Yeah.
So really and truly, it saves. I'm not a big eater outer, but my husband will, he doesn't cook, so he's more comfortable running out and grabbing something at Safeway or something. And there's no excuses. There's all these grab and go items that you can heat and
Well,
eat.
yeah. So like, you can buy freezer dinner meals at the grocery store. It sounds like you've stocked it up so that, if he came home and said, oh, well, I just bought this lean cuisine at Safeway, you'd be like, what? I've got all of that in my freezer already. Why did you do that?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's a great idea to have individually portioned meals because family dynamics can always change, right? If a
Mhm.
husband's coming home late or you're coming home late, then if you've missed the meal, there's already something put aside. So that's
Yeah.
good. So what I want to quickly talk about before we finish up here is we have a guide to freezing food in our course. I'll just show you a quick picture here that's printed off. We get a lot of questions about what foods you can freeze, what foods you can't. We talk about what we're doing, but I'm going to quickly go over this. And in the show notes, we're going to put a link where you can download this guide. It is part of our course, but we're going to give you a little sneak peek so you can take a look at some of the content that we produced in the course. So let's talk a little bit about foods that you can freeze. I'm just going to read off of here. So almost all foods can be frozen because if you look online, what we found is almost everybody has a way of freezing something. But what we want to recommend is that there are some foods that are easier than others. So, don't try to go ahead and freeze egg whites or eggs. It is possible. I'm sure you can find a recipe somewhere. Someone's figured it out, but it's not a super easy thing to do, and the quality texture can change. So this is kind of your tried and true list. So foods that you can freeze: most fruits and veggies. So veggies, some of them have to be blanched, some of them don't, but most can be. All types of beef, poultry, game, seafood. So one of our tips is to take the food out of the store packaging and repackage it into freezer-friendly packaging. So like a resealable bag or your own containers. Or have you ever seen those vacuum seal
Mm-hmm.
sealers? I don't have one, but I know my sister and brother-in-law do, and they will buy lots at Costco and then individually do that. Then they can get longer than 3 months with their stuff.
For
So
sure. If it's vacuum sealed,
yeah.
basically you
And
want to
in the
keep
heavy,
moisture out.
yeah, and the heavy freezer plastic makes it last longer. So you can also freeze baked goods like muffins, breads, breakfast bars, pizza dough, and tortillas, casseroles. You can freeze butter. You can freeze milk. I know a lot of people do. The tip is to open and take out a little bit for expansion. So open the jug, take a little bit out because it will expand, and the last thing you want is that to explode. Shredded cheese, soups, broths, citrus zest. So if you have a lemon and you've cut it, make sure you save that zest for some baking. Nuts. So I actually freeze all of my nuts. I used to keep them in the pantry, but I wasn't going through them fast enough, and they do tend to go rancid. So I'll put them into resealable bags and put them in the freezer. Herbs, breadcrumbs, and then your grains. So like cooked pasta, cooked rice. And the tip is don't overcook them. For best results, keep them slightly undercooked. So that's kind of our tried and true. We know you won't have any problems if you freeze those. So then we're going to talk about foods that you can possibly freeze. So it depends on the method and personal preference. So some people might not like the way these food items are. So you can freeze apples. one of the ways that we learned in our food lab back in university is you want to add a little bit of lemon juice, and then you can freeze it, or citric acid. Potatoes, a little bit tricky depending on how you want to freeze them, but it is possible. So eggs, so raw and cooked eggs in the shell are not recommended to be frozen, but possible to freeze out of the shell. So, and cook, so something like a quiche. It is possible. Certain types of dairy do not freeze well, but are possible to freeze, like sour cream and cottage cheese. So I've often, what have I frozen? I've frozen yogurt, but I put them in ice cube trays. And then once they're frozen, I put them into a bag for smoothies. But I find that the quality of yogurt isn't the same as when you buy it. But if it's starting to go and you know you're not going to finish it, because I get the 3-pack of Greek at Costco. If I'm not going to get to one before the best before date, I'll freeze it into smaller containers or ice cube trays and just add that to smoothies, and there's no issues there. Anything else that you're like you would say that is kind of you can possibly freeze?
I think the biggest thing is the higher the water content, the harder it is to freeze.
Yeah.
So if you're using some of those possibly freezes, if they're in a mixed dish or if they're pureed in, really the trouble with freezing is with like food has lots of cellular structure. And when, like the milk, when you freeze it, the water expands and the cells burst, which then you get like mealy potatoes or like an unusual texture in yogurt. And so if it's in a mixed dish or pureed in, you're not going to notice it because you've broken the cells down anyways. But yeah, everything on that list, I freeze.
One of the things I just tried that isn't on this list because I'm testing it myself, and so far we're on week 3 and it's pretty good, is avocado.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I saw it on Pinterest, and I would get, like, when avocados are on sale, you want to buy them because they can be expensive, but I can't go through them as fast as they ripen up.
All ripe at once.
Yeah, they all ripen at once. So I'll chop them up and slice them up, and in a freezer bag, add a little bit of lemon juice, and then make sure they're all coated and lay it flat. And then I've put it into the freezer after I've sucked out all the air. And I thought, oh, this isn't going to work, right? But I popped my head in and looked at them, and they're still nice, bright and green and yellow. So, and then I took them out for a dish, and they were not exactly the same texture, but they were still pretty good. Like, especially if you're going to mix it into like guacamole or another dish.
Right. I'll put mine in my smoothie.
Yeah, absolutely. Smoothies, no problem, for sure. So avocados we can add to our list here. Sure. Okay, so foods.
The big thing with avocados is my rule of thumb now is not longer than a month because I've waited 3 months, and it degrades in quality as it gets older.
Okay, well then I'm on week 3. I better get to mine. Okay, I'm the only one in the house that likes them, so it's kind of hard. Okay, so fruits not recommended to freeze. So veggies with a high water content. So that's what you're talking about. The cells burst when they freeze. And so think of if you were to freeze lettuce, right, or cucumbers, it just wouldn't work because they've got a high water content. The other day, part of my fridge, I don't know, I've just had too much in it, but I had a pepper, like a bell pepper freeze, and it kind of did the same thing. And it's not that you can't freeze bell peppers, it's just the quality is not going to be that same crisp. So then it was a little bit different, but I still had it. It was fine. But you could tell it looked like it got frostbitten, right? Like it was out in the garden. So yeah, anything with high water content. Mayo is not recommended to freeze. Prepared deli salads like potato salad or eggs in the shell. So those are things that you can't freeze. Andrea, do you have anything to add to that list?
No, my biggest struggle has always been potatoes. Mashed potatoes, yes, if you puree them. Every other kind of potato is very mealy. Some veggies that have higher water content, like cucumbers and lettuce, but like zucchinis and peppers, if they're sauteed first, because they're already softened, broken down that enzyme, they do not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a frozen veggie mix that I got at Costco one time, and it had cucumbers in it and peppers, and it was already kind of cooked or baked and then frozen or blanched, right? So those were totally fine. But yeah, with potatoes, because if you go to the store, like you can buy frozen like hash browns, or you can buy frozen potatoes. But they've done those are usually pretty altered. And it works, but you just don't get that same quality that if you would have it fresh. It's just due to the high water content of them.
Yeah.
Good. Good. Okay. Well, I think that is, on our list, as just one last thing to talk about is flash freezing. So this is kind of like a how-to. So if you're going to recommend, or if you're going to freeze, say, let's do an example of berries. One of the things we recommend doing is flash freezing. So it's a method, and picture you're at the farmer's market and there's a good deal on blueberries or strawberries. You get home and you're like, how am I going to use them all? And I don't want to make that much jam. So think of your strawberries. You can cut them all up. You don't need to blanch them or anything, but you would lay them on a baking sheet and then put them in the freezer. So freeze them all individually like that, really fast at the coldest part of your temperature or your freezer. Then take it out and then put it into whatever container you want so it doesn't all clump up. So I flash freeze a lot of different things. I could probably picture the waffle recipe that I was telling you about. I could probably flash freeze them on a baking sheet, and then without parchment paper, put them back into the bag. That would work as well. So anything else? What else do you flash freeze?
Mostly berries, because my mom has a raspberry bush, so every summer I'm there picking like liters and liters of raspberries, and then I flash freeze them. They go into my smoothies, or I make like a really nice quick raspberry cheesecake. Again, street food, but works really well in that. So yeah, I think we covered it, and I'm really excited to see how people do with that list, and the link will be in the show notes below.
Yep.
And if you want more of these great handouts, you got to head over to getmealprepped.com.
Oh yeah, you want to get our Getting Started checklist. It's really good. If you're just starting to get into meal planning, meal prep, we have everything that you need to think about when getting started. So when I was thinking about getting started with meal planning, I was dreading it because I thought I'd be stuck in the kitchen for 8 hours on a Sunday doing all this meal prep. And we really break it down into kind of the things that you need to have on hand. And you can slowly plug away at getting the different containers and getting your recipes. And it's a really nice, consistent or concise list that you can review, as well as some different templates that we have for meal planning. So make sure you hop on over to getmealprepped.com and get that list. And if you have any questions, you can email us, either Andrea or myself, Susan, at info@nutritionacademy.co. Be happy to answer any of your questions. And if you have any meal planning problems that you're looking for solutions for, please let us know, because we're always looking for inspiration, different ideas to talk about. And we really get our inspiration from you, the listener. And we have a list of people that have sent us feedback and different things that they want to hear about. And we're just going to be working through that list. So please feel free to send us some more information on your struggles and how we can help you get better at meal planning.
See you guys all later.
Bye.